Kלים Perikei Mishnah base. Mishnah Aleph, we spoke about tanor, an oven made for baking. And now we come on to kira, which is a stove. And again, the main chiddush of tanor v'kira, as opposed to ordinary other klicheres, is that kira and tanor are makabel tumah migzeres hakosuv, although they are mechubel karka. And the kira is a stove. And I'm going to try and show you the picture of the stove in this sefer here. This is what it looks like. It's a stove on which can be placed two pots. Kira is made for mokum shvisas shtei kederos, as shown here. And it's made of klicheres and is mechubel karka. Says the Mishnah, Techiloso sholosh ushoreho sholosh. The shear for a kira. Remember, these have a shear because they are gzeres hakosuv, that they are makabel tumah as long as they have a shem of being a tanur or a kira, and therefore a shear applies to them, that they only have the shem kira if they have the shear. Lachatchila, the kira has to be at least 3 tfachim high. Ushirah sholosh, similarly, if the kira was bigger and then broke and you're left with a height of 3 tfachim, same thing. The shiraim have the same shear as the tchila. Sholosh tvachim. Misha tigomer malachta. When does the kira become able to be mekabel tumah? When it's had gemar malacha. With a tanur we said, although normally klicheres has a gemar malacha, when you mitzaref it in a kivshon. However, kira and tanur, tziruf kivshon is not what makes them mekabel tumah. It's when you put at the tiach tfela around the outside of the tanur. And there's a debate whether actually a tefillah is applied to a kira. But whatever, the main shear, the main malacha, which is a goymer malacha of a tanor and a kiraim, is when you masik it, you heat it up from inside as if you're baking with it, as if you're using it for cooking. And the shear for an oven, we said the Mishnah Aleph, was when there's a certain shear enough to, you heat up the tanor enough to bake a certain type of sponge cake called sufgonim. With a kira, says the Mishnah, ezi gemar malachto, mishi yasikenu, when you heat it up, enough k'dei devashel oleho beitzo kalim shebebeitzim terufa unusuna beilfis. When you heat it enough, so it would be enough to cook on it the egg of a chicken. Beitzo kala shebebeitzim is an expression for a chicken's egg because that's the easiest of egg to boil. Terufa. The egg doesn't have to be whole. The egg can be scrambled, broken up, unasuna beilfis, and put into already a heated kli. So all of these things make it easier for the egg to cook. If the hesek that you're doing to the kira is strong enough and long enough to have cooked a chicken's egg, a broken chicken's egg, in a heated pot already, then the kira has had its required hesek and is now had gemar malacha and can be mekabel tumah mikan lahabo. Carries on the Mishnah hakopach. Hakopach is very similar to a kira. It's actually only got space for one pot. One places the pot on top of the kopach. It heats up quicker, and the kopach can also be used for baking. So the Mishnah says it depends why you did it. Asoy lafia, if you did it for baking, then it's got the same shiurim as Mishnah Aleph ketanor, like an oven. And that's relevant for 2 dinim primarily. One is that the shiur for a tanor was 4 tfachim, and the same would be for a kupach. Another relevance is the fact that for a tanor, the shear of a hesek was k'dei lefois boisuf gonin, to bake this sponge cake. Asoy lebishel, if you made the kupach to imitate a kira, and it's made for cooking, not for baking, then shiura kikira. It follows all the shiurim we mentioned at the beginning of the Mishnah, that the shiurim are only 3 tfachim, and the hesek needs not for sufgonim, the hesek has to be k'dei devashel allow beitzo kala shebebeitzim terufa nesuna beilfis. Right, that's part A of the Mishnah. Now we come to part B. We're coming into Yodos of Kלים. A yad is a handle which be'etzim is not able to be makabel tumah, maybe because of the material, or it actually doesn't function with the primary use of the kli, but it's a yad. As the pasuk learns out, we learn out from a Gzeres pasuk Tmeim Yulachem L'chol shebetzarchechem l'rabos es hayodos she'ein tzerich lekli. Anything which is attached to a kli and helps the kli perform its function, that yad is able to be mekabel tumah and able to pass on tumah. In the case of kli cheres, it's only relevant to passing on tumah, because the only way kli cheres can be mekabel tumah is through its avir. A yad hasn't got an avir, so the yad only becomes relevant that if the kli cheres is already tomei, then the yad is able to pass on tumah, just like the acharaim of the kli cheres. If something were to touch the yad, oichlem amashkim were to touch the yad, they would become tomei. Says the Mishnah. Even tefach, the shear of a stone sticking out on the side of a tanur is a tefach. With the yodos, you've always got to be careful. Very often in Mishnah and Mesechta Kelim there are yodos, and there's a shear to the yad. Sometimes the shear is a maximum, which means the yad is a yad even if it's half that shear, and it's a shear up to that shear you have. It's a shear yad. If the yad is bigger than the shear, sometimes that puzzles ruins the whole din of yad. The whole thing's not a yad anymore because you've got too much. Or sometimes you find that if it's more than the maximum shear, then the rest hasn't got a shem yad, but up to the maximum shear, you have got a yad. This one, the Gemara says in Nida, is a yad of the minimum type. Sometimes there's a shear, and that means it's a minimum. That means if you've got less than the shear, then it's not called a yad at all, because it's too little to be used as a yad. But if you have more than the shear, then either the whole yad is tomei, or at least up to the amount of the shear. That's the way yadas can be used. In this Mishnah here, the Mishnah is saying that this is actually a maximum shear. That means an even up to a tefach sticking out, or even less than a tefach, is called a yad. If it's more than a tefach, then up to the tefach is called a yad. Now, Bavtanura tells us the reason for this yad is because it serves as a beis achiza. The most Mefarshim argue with this because the Gemara says quite clear in Nida that this tefach is a maximum yad, and therefore that means that even if you have only half a tefach, you've still got a yad, and even if you've only got a tenth of a tefach, you've still got a yad. If the reason for this yad is because it's a beis achiza, then the shear shouldn't apply to less than a tefach. So the Rambam writes that the reason for this yad is because this yad helps keep, it's a stone stuck to the sides of a tanur, and it helps keep the heat of the tanur. So the Mishnah is telling you up to a tefach, it's got a shem yad. And even if the yad is more than a tefach, it's only that first tefach which has a shem yad. That's the case of a tanur. Umin akira sholosh etzbois. In the case of a kira, it's only 3/4 of a tefach chibur, which is a chibur to the tanur or the kira. So again, let's just recap this. We're dealing with a stone sticking to the wall, the outside wall of a tanur or a kira, and we're saying that up to the first tefach, in the case of a tanur, or up to the first sholosh etzbois, it's called a chibur to the tanur and the kira. Anything more is not called a chibur. Says the Mishnah, what happens if the Evan is yotze from a kupach? Hayotzim and a kupach, and now we follow the same pattern of the ratio that depends what the kupach was made for. Asoy la'afir, if you made the kupach for baking, so it adopts the characteristics of a tanur, then shiur katanur, then the yad follows the shear of a tanur, which is a tefach. Asoy lebishul, had you made the kupach only for cooking on it, then it's got a din of a kiro, shiur kikiro, and the yad is only a yad up to the first sholosh etzbois. If the yad is bigger than that, then it's only the first sholosh etzbois which is able to be metame. Omar Rabbi Yehuda, he says, Loi omru tefach ela bein atanu lekoisel. He's machmir. He's saying, this shear of a tefach for a yad is only when the tanur is backed up against the wall. when a tanur is backed up against the wall, and it's the yad which is sticking between the tanur and the koisel, we then say that we only give you a tefach for the yad. If the tanur is not next to the koisel, just a regular tanur by itself or regular kira by itself, then even the biggest even, there's no shear to the yad. Any size of even sticking out on the side of a tanur or kira is called the yad. Where it's sticking next to a wall, and now because of the yad, you cannot push the tanur against the wall, it's blocking you. As soon as you have a yad more than a tefach, that bit which is more than a tefach is chashiva kenotel, because it's oimeg dinotel. One day you're going to remove it because it's actually inconvenient. It's blocking the room. Therefore, because it's oimeg dinotel, Rabbi Yehuda says the extra of a tefach is not called a shem yad. But where it's not oimeg dinotel, it's standing in the middle of a room, then it doesn't matter how big the even is. It's always got a shear of yad. If you've got two ovens next to each other, and the even is sticking from tanur A to tanur B, then noisin lezer tefach or lezer tefach. The yad extends a tefach. The tefach immediately attached to each tanur. That's a tanur. That's the yad. Vashar, the bit in the middle, which is more than a tefach from both ovens, is tohor. And this chiddush works even according to Rabbi Yehuda. And that's the chiddush actually only works according to Rabbi Yehuda. And that's the dinim of yodos with an even. We'll come back to yodos and future mishnah Hashem.